Good morning from London. I'd firstly like to begin by welcoming everybody to today's event. We've got a great number of participants joining us, so that's a great start to our discussion. I'd like to thank everyone for taking time out of their day to engage and digest, and we hope contribute to today's discussion. I'm Elizabeth Shepherd, Managing Director of Times Higher Education Consultancy, and it's a pleasure to chair today's event. Today's session is brought to you by Times Higher Education in partnership with Coursera for Campus. Throughout the next 58 minutes, we will be focusing on embedding career skills within higher education institutions, examining the future of study across Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. Secondly, and of course, most crucially, our discussion would not be possible without our panel of experts. And I give an extremely warm welcome to Chantal Murray. Welcome, Chantal. Head of Human Resource Development at the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa. Welcome. Our second panelist, Peter Sakau, Director of Academic Affairs at the University of Sieg in Hungary. Welcome, Peter. Finally, well, over to Russia, and I welcome Andrei Suzkin. Andrei is the Vice Rector for Academic Development and responsible for innovation in education and online course development. Welcome, Andrei.
Hello.
And finally, Anthony Tassasol. Anthony is Vice President of the EMEA region for Coursera. Welcome, Anthony.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Well, a welcome to all of our panelists. And I preemptively thank you for your contribution to today's session. Finally, I'd like to outline how we will structure today's session. I'd like our discussion to have as much natural conversational flow as possible. So please engage with your fellow panelists. If you are impassioned by their remarks, we will, of course, offer constructive criticism and keep our discussion in this safe discussion space that we are creating together. I will aim to keep our pace as lively as possible and break to take questions from our significant number of delegates who are joining us today. I'll aim to take a break for questions at the midpoint and also at the end of the session. But if we have an awful lot of questions, I'll try to answer as many within our given time. So to open the discussion, I want to ask each of our panelists to reflect on one specific question. And give the perspective from your own role within your own organization. Today's discussion, as we've heard, is focusing on the importance of embedding career skills within universities within the EMEA region. And we have universities representing all parts of the region with us today. The impact of the COVID-19 pandemic across the world has been profound. In October last year, in October 2020, the European Commission updated their skills agenda for Europe. This document was published in the context of the pandemic and acknowledged by the European Commission as doing so. Whilst acknowledging that the context of COVID-19 has accelerated the digital transition of education institutions around the world, whilst at the same time exposing the current limitations and the digital skills gap that already existed in many countries. And although this research was published by the European Commission, I think this reflects lots of different insight that we've heard from the World Bank and other sources from reflecting the regions throughout the EMEA region. I'd like to ask each of our panelists to reflect on this statement from the position of your own university or organization and give some insight into how the past 12 months has sharpened this focus for you. The focus on the importance of digital skills, and particularly with regard to the development of careers in the countries and the regions within which your institutions sit. I'd like to begin by asking Chantal, can you reflect on that from the perspective of your institution and of course your role as the head of the Human Resource Development Unit?
Thank you so much, Liz. I think, with the African continent and South Africa specifically, we have a number of challenges that I think European institutions possibly don't have. A lot of that is to do with a lot of inequality in society. If we look at our student base, some individuals have ready access to data and devices and other individuals do not. So it has made the jump extremely complex and layered because we've had to think about supportive strategies within the university to make devices and data available as a starting point before we even get really sophisticated in terms of what exactly we are covering and addressing in terms of learning. So that's proven to be very challenging. We also have a highly unionized environment in South Africa, where in terms of fairness, access, equity, there's some very pressing issues that we have to consider, which makes us slower, I think, to be able to embrace a totally sort of more aggressive digital strategy. I think what has been remarkable is in the space of 12 months, the university has literally gone from traditional contact-driven teaching to an online model. And our academics did a superb job within, I think, 2-3 months of literally having to reinvent the way in which they engage with students. And I think that was really good. There's obviously a lot of room for improvement, but it was a really good first step. On the backside of the curtain, so from the staff perspective, not so much the student perspective, what we're seeing is a huge amount of anxiety among staff members to say, am I going to become redundant? What is going to happen to my job? How do I stay relevant? And really looking to a lot more dynamic learning solutions and offerings in order to make sure that they are ready. And that's part of the reason why we have just now made the decision to take our staff development onto Coursera because of the range of cutting edge topics, themes that are available on Coursera. It is supplemented by a traditional approach because of the diversity of our audience, but hopefully it also will allay some of those anxieties around being very agile and having access to really, really cutting edge, updated course material. So that's just some reflection, Liz, very broad. I hope that's okay for starters.
Absolutely, thank you. It's quite profound to hear of anxiety amongst your staff. That really is quite shocking to understand how real that is. Andre, could I ask you from the perspective of your institution and reflection across the country, perhaps?
Yes, sure. I think that in respect to careers development, the main challenge is that while university transfer from online to online learning, our partner IT companies, industrial companies, they transfer to remote work, and no one gets to the office and they have to work remotely. And actually distant learning in our opinion, in some cases, are actually good for future development because many our partner companies don't want to get back. They want to try remote work even after COVID will be finished. I hope it will come to an end in time. And we try to change our educational process, and we now use project-based learning. in which students not only attend lectures and do some exercises online, but they try to implement their own projects with the help of experts from university and partner companies. And during COVID, they have to do that in remote teams. It's first of all, it's very hard, and they have to study new digital tools. But I hope it will be very useful for their future career, because many companies more and more use remote work.
And this project-based learning, Andre, this is an entirely new approach for your university.
We started actually 2 years ago. It's not
Okay.
related to COVID, but for our universities, yes, it's a new approach.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that insight. Peter, any reflections on how the past 12 months has changed things for you?
Yeah, everything changed. And we are looking, our university is a kind of experimental university. We are always looking for new paths. And COVID just boosted some of the changes. Anthony can probably remember quite well that we started our partnership with a strategic planning of the public procurement, how to implement Coursera for campus at the University of Szeged. But because COVID hit in and we had a national lockdown, and Coursera just announced the COVID initiative, and everything was prepared, however, not in the timeline scheduled and written. We had the courage to start the partnership earlier, and the Coursera support team supported us and helped us to start with Coursera earlier. So this was probably one of the key momentum for us, that okay, whatever happens around us, there is a strong partner in the world who will help us. And since then, we are looking on Coursera as a life jacket of the university.
What a wonderful description of a life jacket, Peter. I think it only allows us to ask Anthony, what have you witnessed? What's it like to be the life jacket of the universities that you work with?
So it's a lovely description, which I've not heard before, but thank you, Peter. I appreciate that. So we've had, I guess, a lot of insight across the region when we launched our COVID response initiative, where we gave access to Coursera to universities around the world for free during the first iteration of the pandemic. You know, we had thousands of institutions sign up as they all sought to try and move onto online, with almost 90%, I think, of campuses being shut down in some way or form. As we've kind of gone forward a year, what we've seen is that there are a whole range of different market factors driving around digital skills. So if you look at various different studies, you'll see that the World Economic Forum is predicting that there'll be about 85 million jobs will be displaced by 2025, and that about 40% of core skills of workers a day will change in that same time frame. As was said by our panelists earlier, there's an expectation that 44% of the global workforce will be operating remotely in the future as a result of the pandemic. And there's a huge number of businesses are seeking to accelerate their digitalization skills, as almost every organization is going through some form of digital transformation in their process. And what we're seeing is that as a result, I think, partly as a result of the pandemic and partly as a result of just the evolving landscape of the world of work, is that hiring for entry-level graduate positions has fallen by about 45% globally, in response, I think, to concerns and feelings that students aren't necessarily coming in with the skill sets that are actually required. We're also seeing that there are, I think, mismatches between sort of expectations. So a lot of the students actually expect that organizations, when they join, will help teach them the digital skills that they need to be effective in their roles. And the simple reality is that the majority of organizations are not in the position to actually make that happen. They don't have the internal resources to do that. And they're expecting people to come in with those skill sets already engendered. And actually, a lot of employers are also now looking for other forms of certifications to confirm that you have the digital skills that are needed to be successful in the role. And I think you made that comment about this at the digital skills thing. I think there was a report in the UK literally just a day or two ago talking about how the UK is heading towards a catastrophic digital skills shortage by one of the leading think tanks. And there's actually a drop in the UK in some students taking IT-related disciplines. And yet IT is where we're seeing most of the growth in new roles that are coming forward and around those kind of digital skills. And I think it is in those kind of domains of data analysts around AI and machine learning, big data, digital marketing, digital transformational skills, software application developers, and all of these kind of tech-related areas. These are the big areas of growth for most organizations. And a lot of the companies that are looking to hire new people into those roles are struggling to find those skills available from students coming out of universities. And so I think a university education is a hugely powerful thing for an individual to have, but the universities and the institutions that are combining that kind of, if you like, traditional form of university education with a focus on developing job-ready skills that will be relevant for the future are the ones that are going to have the highest career outcomes for their students, not just getting into work, but an actual career of choice. And I think we're seeing a real shift from students in terms of the decision-making criteria they're going through in terms of which organization should I join. There's a much bigger concern on if I'm going to invest 3 to 4 years of my life and potentially have to fund that and incur a lot of debt to do so, I want to be really sure I'm going to get a job at the end of it and a job that will actually materially matter to me. And it's becoming a more important criteria in their selection decision.
Absolutely. Thank you, Anthony. I'd like to pick up on one thing actually you mentioned there. Digital literacy. I think I read the same report, the UK, it's not a very positive picture of the levels of digital literacy of graduates from UK institutions. And perhaps ask Andre, if you can reflect on the demand for the courses within your institution. Is it similar to the UK picture that that Anthony described? Is it do you see the engagement with those types of courses from students coming to your particular university?
Yes, sure. Actually, in Russia, we have a special program devoted to digital skills, and a significant part of this program is digital literacy. We have courses, it's not related to our university, the courses created by our government, and any person in Russia can participate in that courses and acquire some very basic digital skills. Also, we try to include in our university programs at least basic digital skills, but they are not related to literacy. It's some advanced skills. Not all of them are related to programming and IT competences, but data analysis, usual social network, digital sources, some, for example, social media analysis, they all very popular, and our students try to learn as much digital skills as they can.
Right, and do you think this is identified by students as important and linked to, as Anthony was saying, to employability, to that future securing a role for them?
Yes, sure. I don't think that students can work without digital skills, and most of them understand that. It's not clear for some professors. They can work without digital skills, but most of all modern students, at least in Russia, they understand that digital skills are absolutely required in any job, in any profession, with any company.
Thank you, Andre. I'd like to pick up on that comment, actually, and ask Chantal to come in. We've had one question in the Q&A. It's a multi-part question, but I'm just going to pick up on the first part. How can academics have been so successful in effective online teaching during the pivot to emergency online teaching if they did not receive appropriate training? Have they received training since? and where is the evidence that this has been successful? How hard has that been at your institution?
It's been hard. I mean, I think everybody's made all the obvious mistakes. I think we make lots of assumptions. We don't do scoping properly. We don't necessarily know our audience well enough. And I think the biggest challenge from an HR perspective is that our staff themselves, you know, to the point that's being made, are often of a different generation. They themselves are not digitally literate and as skilled as they should be, and yet they've got to lead that process in terms of curriculum design and thinking about what a qualification should look like. So it has been rocky. I mean, I think our ICT division has been brilliant at the university in trying to offer as much support as possible. We've got an academic sort of e-learning component that has really had to be on top of their game to support academics so that they do the content sort of aspects, and the e-learning unit does the how, and the how to frame it and how to make it as dynamic and accessible as possible. But it has been a huge learning journey under a very stressful climate. We're certainly not there yet. I mean, I think the university has just selected a new online platform for our student offerings, for our curriculum, our qualifications. We've only just launched that now, and already there's some errors that have been made, which again was inevitable. So there's a lot of learning. A lot of it is messy learning in trying to get it right. And I think although it steps in the right direction, and the feedback from the students has been that it's been generally supportive, there's no doubt that the level of elegance, the level of sophistication is nowhere near what it needs to be at the moment. I think just coming back quickly to the question around digitization and the workplace, if I may, and that's just to say, I think what's happening now is, aside from going online, because going online on its own doesn't necessarily solve many of the problems, it is also to think about how do you structure a qualification in such a way that it becomes dynamic, and not just about the niche subject discipline engineering, but within the discipline engineering, how do you create different skill sets, critical thinking, systems thinking, how do you think outside the box and promote creativity even in an engineering niche? And so there's question marks around that very linear traditional way of developing a qualification, now having to think about the subject discipline surrounded by digital skills, as well as a whole host of other critical cross-field outcome skill sets that need to be embedded. And how do you do that in terms of a normal academic year? Should it be a normal academic year? Should we reframe what an academic year looks like? And how do we partner with industry to create theoretical and practical chunks and blocks in a way that is far more dynamic than currently the case?
Gosh, thank you, Chantal. There's a huge amount for us to pick up on there. I'd like to ask Peter first to come in and talk about the curriculum, perhaps, and how at your university you're ensuring that graduates do leave with the skills that are required by employers, and if you can give examples of how you're embedding that within the curriculum.
Well, first I would like to just add a quick reflection to Chantal, that our university is running competency tests since 2015, because we had to realize that the students are not really successful after a successful higher education or gymnasium level. They are not really successful in the higher education institutes. Somehow their scores are not correlate with the success at the university, and we found out that they are following a different learning methodology, learning styles that may be successful in the high schools but not at the university. And that was probably our first step towards Coursera, because there is a course called Learning How to Learn, and we translated that course to Hungarian, and now over 6,000 students passed that course. And it became also very useful during the pandemic, because we had to teach our students for new learning methodologies, new learning types and tools and skills what they could pick up, and that was a great help for us. That course was available online immediately. So now 1/3 of the university students already passed that course.
Right.
And probably this leads also towards that they will finish the university very successfully. We have a very great conversation around with different companies and Chamber of Commerces, and also on national level with the educational authority, because they are making researches after the students are finishing the university, how successful they are later in their jobs.
Great, great. Anthony, would you like to come in and give any comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think just going back to the question, which I thought was an excellent question, by the way, in terms of, you know, how are we so successful in theory in doing this move to effective online teaching? And I think success in many cases is measured by the fact that education has been able to continue in an online domain, right? So, but there's been a real variety in how people have actually managed to make that shift. Some have simply recorded lectures they would have given in class and post them online. Some have tried to replicate in a live sense online what they would have done on campus. And others have fundamentally adapted their organization to the way they conduct online learning, designed to suit an online learning. And that's often based on how much expertise they had in the first place and how they moved forward with. So I think there is a view that the education system as a whole has adapted very effectively to going online because we've managed to use something like Zoom. But it remains to be seen as to whether the outcomes will be the same, whether they'll be better or worse or the same for students in terms of the skills that are being taught and engendered, their career outcomes, the employability concerns, and effectively how effective was that form of education. And that I don't think we have the data on that yet. We've made the shift. We just don't know how effective that shift has been doing in maintaining or improving outcomes for our students. And of course, there's a lag from that. You know, the pandemic's been running for about a year. That's probably the length of an academic year. For some students, we won't see that for even 2 or 3 years still to come. For some, they'll just be graduating, and we're starting to see the impact of that now. But that's, I think, when we'll start to see how effective the education industry as a whole has done. And I suspect we'll see some significant variations at an institution level in terms of how effective they've managed to translate those outcomes, with those that are probably being seen to be more effective, who are actually really focused on the needs of an online audience, as opposed to trying to replicate something that worked on campus and trying to just make it simply virtual, but also focusing on the changing dynamics of what the world is looking for in terms of the skills required for students.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I add
please do.
Just one quick remark. I can't resist. So we have some very short-term experience at the university that because pandemic, most of the courses are online. Students became more experimental. They don't really following their study path, because there are courses available online which were not available before, and there was limits to access. But right now, these courses became available, and some of the students started to experiment and pick up those courses. These are extracurricular courses, so they are not counting in to their original study path. However, they're trying themselves, and maybe this is also one role of the university to show the students the world and the possibilities of the different subject areas.
What an incredible unintended consequence. Andre, have you observed anything like this at your university? Have students become engaged in where they otherwise wouldn't?
Actually, yes, we have a very strange experience. Some students became more engaged, and they asked more questions for professors, and our teacher was, some of them at least, was great. They didn't expect. They at least they used to communicate with auditory person to person, but online with modern students actually works fine. and we start in-person teaching in this semester. And before semester start, we conduct a survey of students which will they prefer go to university or study online, and most of half students choose they prefer to study online. Even actually we have the ability to open a university and invite them on campus. And now we have an option if all students in a group preferred online teaching, they can apply for it. And if the professor is agree to conduct courses online, they can do that.
Wow, what a shift. What a shift. Is it the same in South Africa, Chantal? Do you think you've seen similar trends?
I'd like to think, and again, I'm speaking now on behalf of the academic community, which I shouldn't do because I'm on the other side of the fence. I mean, I'd like to think there is more engagement because I think students are generally more comfortable with the medium, and I think they probably feel less intimidated. But I can't confirm that. I do know that all of this creates interesting things from an HR perspective. And I don't want to jump into that in case I change the topic. So I'll refrain from comment for a while.
Okay, that's no problem at all. Well, on that note, I'm going to take a couple of questions from the audience. We've got some incredible questions, so I'd like to just interject with one, perhaps two. The first, I think, posed to all our panelists. From a social mobility perspective, do the panel agree that the inequality between students' access to the job market has widened as a result of the pandemic? In other words, those with higher levels of social capital are better insulated than those with lower levels. Anthony, any view on that?
Wow, that's a challenging question. So I'm not sure it's as simple as yes and no. I think in many cases that has undoubtedly happened, but I think there are more opportunities, I think, for individuals to access other forms of education that perhaps they didn't have before because of the explosion of online content. You know, we've worked with more than, I think, 200 government departments around the world who are funding workforce or citizen development programs, and in many cases specifically focused on people being made unemployed as a result of the pandemic, giving them free access to training programs to develop digital skills. There are lots of organizations out there that enable people to develop skill sets online, whether it's through coding workshops or technical skills development, without having to go to a formal institution, without having to leave their house, and in many ways, in very cost-effective ways of developing those skills. And I think if people are developing the right set of skills, i.e. the skills that are very heavily in demand by employers, and there actually isn't enough supply in the marketplace, and again, it's typically based around more of these technical emerging skills, employers are becoming much more open to looking at different ways of confirming those skill sets, whether they're what we would call, let's say, a gateway credential written by someone like Google or IBM, where they're effectively certifying that you have a certain level of capability in these domains, or they're just more broader kind of certifications where you can say, look, I've done some learning, I've done some training in this, I've got some assessments, I can showcase my expertise, as being alternative ways to prove that you have that capability set. And we're seeing much more willingness for employers to accept that. So that does create more opportunity for access. And I think online creates access for anybody in the world. I mean, we have some incredible learner stories from people in war-torn countries, people have almost no internet access, no possibility of going to an educational institution, who have transformed their lives through accessing online capability. Equally, there's a challenge in helping people understand what they should learn, how they should learn, the best sources for that information, etc. And clearly, you've got a strong social network behind you, you've got lots of resources, you've got lots of people to advise and guide you, you're more likely to be directed by the right outcomes. And you're also much more likely to be able to benefit from things like university educations, which kind of put you into those higher echelons of academic and educational experience. So I think there's some interesting dynamics in the world that have a potential to address some of the social issues, but they are clearly existing in many pockets of society today.
Absolutely, thank you, Anthony. Andre, from the perspective of Russia, have you, I mean, it's early to say, observed any indications of the impact on students' access to the job market?
I think, first of all, that in Russia we have our education is free for students with sufficient level of knowledge. So any students who had a good knowledge and can prove it can access university and increase social capital if they use university resources properly. And now we try to push our students not only to study our courses, but we tell them that they should build their digital portfolio during their study at university. They have to build their own toy projects. They have to study courses which can provide additional certifications, for example, Coursera courses, or we have our own Russian platform, Open Education in Russia. And if students will use all of these possibilities, they will increase their employability.
Okay.
At least we hope so, and try to help as much students as we can.
An incredible reflection on the situation in Russia. Thank you so much, Andre. And Peter, any view on this from your experience?
It's very hard to say because we don't have data, especially not on national level. Where we have data is in Hungary, the application process to the universities is centralized. So all the applicants need to send their application till the middle of February to a central system, and then these central office runs the processes, and the universities get the students in June, and we start the semester in September. And we got the first results of these applications numbers, and it came out that comparing to last year, the number of applicants has been risen by 10%, and especially by the distance learning or lettering courses. So I see that it's maybe an opportunity, or maybe this is the effect that that some people think I probably will lose my job, or I lost my job, and I need to learn something new or refresh my skills at a university. So this is right now what we can see on national level.
Okay, I think you're right. That, you know, as the data emerges, and obviously we'll understand things like that from things like the Coursera Global Skills Index, or the other data that will emerge in time. And I think, yeah, absolutely, that picture will become clearer. Chantal, you mentioned in your first words about the reality of the situation in South Africa. Any reflection on students and how this has affected their potential future careers?
Yeah, I mean, I think universities are under huge pressure to think about how to, I mean, as you know, we've got a bit of a funding crisis on our side at the moment in higher education on our side. There's lots of protests, and we need to think about funding. And then, of course, associated with funding is access to devices, access to data, and access to a suitable space to learn. So when we assume we can just learn online from home, that reality is different for many students. And so I think, coming back to Anthony's point, it's a little bit of yes and no, because on the one hand, it just opens up such an enormous spectrum of possibilities. If you can get it, if you can access it, if you can unlock that door, what do institutions have to do to get a person to that level where they can unlock that door? And we're grappling with that now. And we're not grappling with that just with students, we're grappling with that with staff. We have got staff on the professional and administrative side of the university that literally goes, well, and on the academic side too, it goes from our top researchers all the way through the spectrum to campus security, cleaning staff, etc. And all of those individuals have different realities. How are they going to access, for example, Coursera? So what's really easy for one person is not going to be easy for another. And again, the question is going to come up with, how do we make it come alive?
Yeah.
And we're still grappling with that now.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to pick up, Chantal, on a comment that you made in your earlier comment, the role of industry, and reflect on an additional question from our audience, which asks, how can we work more closely with employers to embed the skills that they want to see in new recruits more extensively into university courses? Can we, in higher education institutions, do more to work collaboratively with companies on this? I know that in the various institutions that are represented on our panel today, there's lots of different examples. I'd like to ask Andre, how do you feel, how do you work with employers? And do you feel that this is, could be done more, and how important this is?
I think it's one of the most important topic that we should devote our attention, because university can't teach digital skills to students if our staff can't work, don't know digital skills. And we organized several training for our staff. At least a year ago, we organized training courses for remote learning, distance learning tools such as Zoom, Microsoft Teams, or so on. Because now we can't imagine that someone can't know how to use Zoom, but actually a year ago, most of our staff, they didn't heard about Zoom at all. I don't know what is Zoom. The next step is we try to teach our staff how to create online courses.
Okay, yeah.
How to create content, how to create not only talking head courses, but with practical exercises, simulators. I think excellent approach from Coursera, guided projects. So we try to teach our staff how to create practical courses online. And another, I think, interesting approach is digital pedagogy, but even now we don't know which approach to teach and how to do that.
Okay. And
so I think it's a very controversial topic.
Right. Anthony, any reflection on that?
Yeah, I think it is, as you say, it's a period, I guess, in many cases of innovation for organizations and experimentation. And in many senses, the pandemic, I think, forced like the whole world into a form of mass experimentation and how best to adapt to the circumstances we find ourselves in and the best routes forward. And I don't think there is any one answer to this. And equally, there isn't like a single solution. As we've seen in some of the comments in the chat, there is going to be some courses in university are very, kind of applied in the way that you have to learn, a very hands-on and new field experience and so on. And, online is never going to be a substitute for that. It can be a complement to it, but it's never going to replace it. And in the same ways, I don't think online will ever replace a university experience or some of the joys you can get from campus and the social interaction that can come from. I think there is an evolving view that an institution, a university, is moving towards a world where they are not the single supplier of information to a student. Like everything doesn't have to be developed inside the four walls of the building and only by those staff members. But a university has an ability to actually look outside of their borders and look at alternative forms of learning materials that can be engaged, whether they're Coursera or another platform or other forms of learning, and actually help curate that and guide students as to the right sources and contextualize that information that's available online within the construct of the degree or the program of learning and the goals that the student has in their own career development and their skills application. And then bringing that together with businesses. I mean, we as Coursera, of course, we work with thousands of institutions. We know exactly the skill sets that businesses are looking to engender in their own workforce because they don't see them within their current employees and the skills they're recruiting for. So there's a real opportunity, I think, for universities to collaborate with businesses and to collaborate with governments who are trying to improve citizen outcomes and avoid mass unemployment programs to be like the guiding force and how to bring all these multiple strands of educational opportunity together is something that's holistic and delivers a sensible outcome and solves that problem for the overwhelming sources of information available and just simply not knowing where to turn and how to integrate it. And that's a very different perspective that university can bring, but is uniquely, I think, empowered to do it with the relations that it has, and has a potential, I think, to really cement itself as the linking force between education, business, and government, global transformational programs at a societal level, to be the glue that binds all of that together and really delivers on the power of education as a force for good.
Gosh, I think you picked up some incredible themes there, Anthony. The dialogue, guiding the discourse, involving all the different stakeholders in this. What Andre describes as quite overwhelming is to know, identify the right solution, the best solution. Peter, any thoughts on how your institution has engaged across these stakeholders to try to identify how to navigate the mess that Chantal described in her opening statement, the messy way in which we've all had to deal with the past 12 months?
Well, if I can start a little bit more earlier, in 2019, we had about 2,000 courses with full online content. During the pandemic, it raised. We just counted it at the end of the semester that there is 20,000 online courses right now at the university because of the pandemic. However, and I strongly agree with Andrei's remark that the quality is really varied because we couldn't give a strong support to our teachers to develop these contents. Now, Coursera also gives us a helping hand, and there is trainings, and these we would like to implement those how to create online content. And lead our professors also towards to and ask them to pass these courses. And we had also a conversation with companies that what content would be great for them. And at these cases, we are talking about validation, because normally students could ask for credit transfers, and in some cases these are regulated. There is a list of courses which will be accepted, and these courses are used for the students at the beginning of the semester. In some cases, but we also give the freedom of the students to choose freely from the Coursera catalog courses, and ask at the end of the semester the teachers maybe those courses fit or not. And this is the credit transfer process. And we also giving them the opportunity to apply for different company projects, and those can be validated later. So these three is our paths, and these are working at the same time. Okay,
there's some really excellent examples there, I think, Peter. Chantal, any insight from your institution? You mentioned the important role of industry. How does this work?
I think South Africa at the moment has got a very interesting landscape. We've got funding that is available, but for very specific kinds of projects that are aimed at trying to close the unemployment gap. So, for example, in our terminology, we talk about internships, which we all can relate to, but we also talk about learnerships, and we talk about workplace experience projects, and we talk about incubators. And so there's quite a bit of funding around those little vehicles, that if we are able to put those vehicles in place in a particular qualification stream and show collaboration between the university and, for example, an industry partner, there's incentives. So it's a good push to get universities to start thinking differently about the way in which a qualification rolls out. And what's wonderful about that is typically making sure that in the learning process itself, there is combinations of theory and practice in both environments, but also that there is placement and bridging into the corporate or the workplace environment as well with mentorship support. so that in theory, when the person arrives in the work environment, they should be a better rounded graduate who's able to hit the ground running. I need to just also say that it requires a fundamental shift for many academics to think differently from a traditional mindset. And that process is underway, and it's being pushed by COVID and by the fourth industrial revolution. But I think the question that I am grappling with myself is, how do we make sure we do it internally fast enough to be able to do it externally? The opportunities are there, the funding is there. We just have to rethink and reimagine. And part of that is an entrepreneurial spirit within the university. And I think that for me is really the crux of the matter. We can have all of the digital options available. How entrepreneurial is the culture? How free are you to innovate? How free are you to explore? If the culture doesn't support that, then you have a problem in terms of translating into practice. And so I think for me, the question is going to be whether universities support a culture that allows staff members to experiment with new horizons, as opposed to, for example, very traditional panel systems that approve qualification structures that have to go through lots of red tape. That process, those processes must be rethought, because they are not going to work for traditional universities in this time.
Thank you, Chantal. I'd like to use that as the basis for our final set of questions. We have just under 8 minutes remaining of our discussion. We've barely got through the questions, but truly believe we could have continued for several additional hours. But I would like to ask each of our panelists. Chantal, I'm going to go last because I feel you've sort of already developed this theme. What's missing? Andre, you talked about the traditional mindset perhaps that you've encountered in your institution. What do you believe is missing? What's the next challenge that you will face to ensure that the skills needed are embedded so that the graduates from your university can go on to the successful careers that your university wants them to have as they progress post gaining their qualifications? What is that remaining challenge in your view, or many challenges?
I think at least at our university we have two main challenges. The first challenge is related to our staff and the approach to build and to create educational programs. And unfortunately we have a very traditional university, and we try to teach that we already know. Not what requested by industry, not digital skills, but traditional, for example, physics, mathematics, engineering, and our industry partners, for example, from mechanical engineering or metallurgy, they said that we need, for example, persons who knows basics, electrical engineering, and they know digital skills.
Okay.
Unfortunately, not. We have only few programs created in such a way. We have to build multidisciplinary programs. So most of at least engineering and even humanitarian, they need to know both, and they need to know how to use tools to do their own work. And the second challenge is collaboration, because I think not one university can create courses on each topics. We need to find ways how to collaborate with Coursera, with other universities, with industry partners, how to invite their courses, how to use them in our process, and how our universities can use our courses, and so on.
Thank you. Those two not insignificant challenges, Andre. Peter, your thoughts on the remainder of the mountain there is to climb?
Quality insurance came to my mind, probably because the change was very sudden and very quick, and we couldn't. Well, we did our best, but there was no time to consider. And usually, when we develop something, there is a discussion through the university on several levels: how to teach, what to teach, how to develop, what would be the best way. We didn't have that opportunity. So now we need to maybe stop for a while if we can, and see what we have done, and check those study materials and contents.
That's really fascinating. That echoes one of the questions that we've been asked in the Q&A. How do we eradicate or at least reduce bad or erroneous online material? I think it must be something that many people within the sector are feeling. You know, it was such a rush, as you described. You know, arguably, I mean, I suppose it will take historians many decades to unpick what we are all currently experiencing. But I think that's a really profound reflection. Anthony, what are the challenges that you believe the sector is still yet to experience?
So I think it really is a recognition that it's a reimagining of education in many ways. And I would describe it as a sort of analogy. It's a little bit like making a transition from going to watch a play where you go into a physical building and you watch some actors perform on the stage to watching a movie. And the way in which you put a movie together is not the way you put a play together. It's designed in a very different way. It's designed for a different audience. So if you just put a play on the big screen, you're not going to get very many attendees. You're not going to get very much interest. It's not designed for that format. And the way in which, you know, education has the opportunity to be reimagined, I think, is about being more collaborative. It is being about more blended. It's about recognizing the best of both worlds, of being the physical, the practical, the social elements, as well as some of the online elements that give you that flexibility in different ways to operate. And that will also open up a much more global access to education, because if you can do a lot of your education online, you can really, you know, deliver an education program from anywhere in the world to anybody anywhere in the world, which creates more interesting competitive dynamics for the industry as well. But I do think critical to that is the focus on the staff, on the faculty, and as Chantal has talked about, you know, this is a massive change we're asking people to do, to think about how to provide education in a very different vehicle than they've perhaps ever done before, and to also adapt to rapidly changing skill sets that many of them have never experienced or know much about themselves, and how those skill sets can intersect with their particular worlds is a set of obligations we're putting on people, and we don't support them in that evolution. It's not realistic to expect them to be successful in that journey. And so it is it's about a holistic approach to how we transform an organization and transform the educational sector to really be that powerful force that links these different communities and turns education into something that really is skills focused, lifelong learning focus, and delivers the kind of career outcomes that we all going to need if we're going to restart the economy after the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a theme that's emerged, the importance of staff and faculty, the training needs, observing those needs, meeting those needs, so that they can in turn embed the career skills that graduates need. Chantal, I'd like to give you the final comment to reflect on that theme that's emerged from our brilliant discussion today.
Thank you. I mean, I think just concurring with what Anthony is saying, I think part of the biggest challenge we've got in summary is silos. I think a lot of universities battle with a very fragmented way of being. And so you've got typically the academic side that's separate, that focuses outward on the students. You've got the behind the scenes internal staffing side, and there's huge amounts of fragmentation there, which is sad, because I think, for example, if HR as a function had to engage more with academia, we'd often find that the labor lens and the discipline lens actually complement each other really nicely instead of keeping them separate from one another. So I think it's about becoming more integrated, more fluid as an organization. And I think traditional academia has always been quite structured, often bricks and mortar in every sense of the word. And it's to become more organic. And I think that's a huge culture shift which has to take place, and it has to take place fast. I also think you cannot give what you yourself don't have. And so therefore, if we want to be successful and survive, we have to look at the staffing, cultural aspects of the organization and prioritize those. Because sometimes you can have all the bells and whistles, and that can sustain you maybe for a few years. But if the things behind the curtain are not taken care of, it is going to fall apart. And I think, to use what Anthony was saying, there's certain dinosaur elements in a university, and then there's these rocket science elements. And it's this crazy, surreal reality where you're sitting with a structure that doesn't enable the kinds of innovation that is possible, and you're sitting with policies that are horribly outdated and outmoded. So how do we see this animal, this organism, as one thing and approach it holistically rather than seeing it as all separated? So I just want to concur with what Anthony said.
Thank you, Chantal. Thank you. Gosh, what to end on the dichotomy of the challenge that faces the sector. But my final word is to thank our panelists. Thank you, Andre. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Chantal. What a discussion. My apologies to our audience. We barely even skimmed the surface of your questions, but thank you so much for your engagement. From Times Higher Education and Coursera for Campus, thank you for your time today, and wish everyone safe and well. Thanks so much.